Hello, happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of The Practice. This show is an unrehearsed look into my workflow, usually in Cinema 4D, but other digital art applications as well. My name's Stuart. I'm a 3D artist, illustrator, animator, and your pal, and I'm excited, just like every week, to have you back with us again. Now this week, we're doing, as you can probably tell by the footage so far, another character. But we're going to be doing something a little bit different than we normally do, and we're going to be using Mixamo as we frequently do to pose and rig and animate this guy, but we're going to be hacking it in a way. We're going to be doing a sort of an unconventional character in a lot of ways. And we're going to be adding some geometry and removing some geometry before and after using Mixamo to rig. So I'm excited to show you sort of my thoughts there. And then we'll be adding some hair and some other details and really making a fun, quirky, almost Muppet-style character. So as you can tell now, we're just sort of adding a little bit of detail to the legs here. It's going to be a big oafy kind of character. So we're sort of giving him a belly and a little bit of a round midsection. The limbs here are going to be really kind of like stovepipes, very kind of thick and cylindrical. Only added a little bit of a sort of, bulge there to the foot area. Those are not what you think they are at this point. What I'm going to be doing with this character is having the face reside in the chest. Having, this character really isn't going to have a head in the typical way that we know it. It's really sort of a silly character here. And the tricky thing here is if we're going to use Mixamo to rig this, we'd assume that there's going to be some big issues in the way that the auto rigging is applied because we don't have a head. And, as you may know, when you're setting up the points for the joints, you have to select a chin. And we wouldn't want to put that in the middle of the chest because then it would overlap with the spine. And we wouldn't want to put it above the head because everything needs to touch the geometry. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a very basic placeholder head that we can attach the joints to and then ultimately remove that later. Clean some things up with the weight tool. So here we go. We fleshed out the basic proportions of the character, got really the general forms in place, and we're exporting an FBX. And I wound up having a little bit of issue here with the initial passes. I wasn't sure what the problem was at first, and I think at first the symmetry object wasn't expanded. So that may have been the issue, but we get a couple of these errors here. And I tried as an OBJ, tried untextured, still doesn't work. And I know that some people have frustrations with Mixamo in terms of getting their model to work. And that happens sometimes. But after a couple of tries and a couple different exports from Cinema, we were able to get that working. And we're going to select just sort of a simple walk cycle. And, there's a lot of options for walk cycles in Mixamo, but since this is meant to be a big, kind of dumpy, heavy character, I wanted to do something that felt slow and lumbering and sort of matched the personality of the character. And I also chose one, some of the earlier choices that we were looking at looked great, but the head was hung really low and the shoulders were slumped over. And I needed to keep in mind the fact that we're ultimately going to be removing the head like we did there. And I didn't want the shoulders slumped over too far because that's where our eyes are going to go. Now I'm going into the weight tool and I'm selecting the neck joint and removing all weight from that. And I'm going into the shoulder joints, and which actually is the top of the vertebrae here. And then I'm painting those in 100%. So that way we've removed all trace of the neck joint. And now we've got a walk cycle on a headless character. I'm going to go back into one of the older files and grab the mouth and eyes here, sort of add those in. And then you're probably thinking, you'll see the error here. When I initially go to bool that mouth back off, of course we realize that the mouth doesn't have any animation. It's moving all over the place. And of course I couldn't have added this initially because the teeth and that mouth opening would have gotten really wonky when the spine was added in rigging. So what I've done here is I've added a PSR tag, and that's it's a constraint tag with the PSR option turned on. What you can do there is you add the tag to its. I had a bit of trouble finding it here at first, but it's under the character the character menu, I believe. So here I'm still searching for it. Bear with me. This is unrehearsed recording on the fly, so this is the creative process, warts and all. So there's the position tag. I turn on, there's the constraint tag. I turn on PSR, which stands for position, scale, and rotation. And what I can do is drag in the joint in the rig that I want the booled mouth opening to follow, and that winds up being one of the spine joints, right? And what you can do is once that's established, you can choose an offset. And since I didn't want it mapped directly onto the spine itself, I needed it to stand proud a little bit of that so it would intersect the right portion of the torso. I was able to do that using the offset parameters. And once I have that set up, I go ahead and add the teeth, add that constraint tag to the teeth and to these eyes, which really is the symmetry object. And what's great is I applied the tag to the symmetry object itself, so you'll see as I go through the rest of the video, I can just continue adding facial features, and those will track and follow the position of the joints that I've input into the constraint tag. And now I felt like what really needed to happen with this guy is he needed to be sort of big and fuzzy. And so I started by adding some fur. And what I wanted to do was establish some all-over texture, some sort of fuzzy all-over texture. And you can use fur to do that instead of a hair object because I think it's a little bit less intense in terms of its resources needed. I think it renders and processes a little bit quicker, and it's shorter and not as reactive to dynamics automatically. So we've covered the whole body in this fur, and I go ahead and alter the color and the count and all that stuff to get a nice even fill. Of course, you don't see much of the fur effect until you turn on some lighting, some AO, possibly some global illumination. So we go ahead and do that. And so you can really see the effect of the fur a little better here once we've got all that added in. I'll go ahead and make it pretty short, make it fairly thick. I wind up increasing the fur count by orders of magnitude, make it much, much larger. What I tried to do here, there was fur coming in through the teeth, which I didn't like, so I tried to add the fur object to a Boolean, which didn't work. It actually just wound up eliminating the entire fur object. If anyone's got any pointers there, let me know. So what I wound up doing is deleting that hair object and coming up with a new selection, and then reapplying that, just having that selection not incorporate the mouth area. So there we go. You see how that fur really adds a ton of character there. Playing with some of the settings here and the fur. And the fur, it's still, the texture is still a hair texture, so you're able to add that kink and clump and density and all that good stuff that makes it feel really realistic and kind of interesting. And what I'm going to do here is I wanted to add some longer, more flowing sections of true hair, which was going to react as the character moved. But I didn't want it all over, so I selected sort of a couple areas in the shoulders and the arms, a little bit on the upper leg there, And that sort of adds to the feel and creates a bit more variation and interest in the way the fur is falling. And you see there, it automatically reacts to the movement in the geometry, which is a really great effect. And so again, going in through the settings, I typically like to increase the count of hairs but turn down the segments just a little bit. Now, one of the issues here when I'm trying to create a looping animation, obviously, is the hair object will start standing on end. Then it will flop down as the animation starts playing. But we don't want the hair to be in a totally upright position when we loop back around after the end of the first run through the frames, right? It won't loop properly. So what I've done here, and it's not a perfect fix, is gone ahead and relaxed the hair, which you can do in the hair object under dynamics. You click relax and the amount of frames you want it to count ahead, and that gets us a lot closer to being able to loop perfectly. Now, there's probably a better fix for this, if I'm perfectly honest. I think there's a way to set the initial state of the hair to match what your... Like, I think you can play through the frames and select a frame that you would like the start position to be, but I couldn't be bothered for whatever reason this week. And so now I'm selecting a background color. And more I've been enjoying, especially with these simple character walk cycles, I've been enjoying really rather simple backdrops. So what I'm going to do here is just use luminant textures and a couple of pieces of very simple geometry, just kind of set up this rather simple flat background. I also felt that the character looked a little too bug-eyed. He was a little too crazy looking, and I wanted him to be a little more mellow looking. So I added some eyelids, which you'll see sort of calm down his look immediately. And now I'm sort of fine-tuning some of the placement of these facial features inside the torso. And now with the background color and hair texture and all that lighting looking good, you can see that the character's really taken on a lot of personality. Felt that it needed a little bit more detail and that a big kind of wonky nose would feel right. So that was sort of the bit of detail to the face that really seemed to bring this character home. When I was sort of sketching this fella, I didn't have a nose in mind, but you gotta always be willing to adapt and adjust as you go. And as I looked at it, I decided, it didn't really need that. Continuing to adjust colors. Going with a slightly more yellow character and a slightly more reddish-orange background. I wanted them to be in the same family, but not quite the same as each other. That yellow background was feeling a little bit too harsh for where I wanted to take the character, so I made it a little bit more of a orangey carrot sort of color. Added a little bit more yellow to the character's material and to the hair. Starting to feel right. Yes, there is one more facial feature detail I wound up adding here. And that was some lips. I didn't love the way the geometry was interacting with this bool and some of the movement. And this really, it looks cool and it's fun, but also wound up being like a bit of a cleanup mechanism for me. So I create, I use the edge to spline function. I create this sweep object, use a PSR tag the constraint tag to set up the location. And that sort of cleaned up the edges of the mouth, which I was feeling. Continuing to tweak some of these little parameters here, getting the final piece dialed in. Added some orange to the shadows there. Turned up some of the counts on some of these bits of fur and hair. I wanted a little bit more coverage. It can feel a little bit fuzzier. And for all that hair, we're still getting pretty decent render times, looking at, about a minute per frame, which really isn't so bad at all. So here I'm just setting up the final pass at rendering out all these frames, which we'll start doing now. After a couple of these go, I wound up just cutting the recording and picking it up towards the end. No reason to wait through all that. Now, another way to solve the little bit of the hiccup that you get in the hair, pardon me, I've gone ahead and cut forward here to the final retouching in Photoshop. Like I was going to say, one of the ways you could avoid this issue with the hair would be to create, copy and paste your keyframes and create a loop of him, like a double loop of him walking through the animation twice, and then just cutting out a middle portion of it so that your hair is already in motion by the time you pick up the animation, as opposed to from starting with frame one. So anyway, I felt like I got it close enough. There's a little bit of a hiccup in the loop that you can see when we go through these, but it felt close enough. And so here we're outputting the final GIF animation. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to drop one in the comments below. If you want to keep up with me and the work that I'm doing, please check me out on Instagram at DLGNCE. And until next week, this is Stuart saying goodbye. Thanks.